Kathleen Wynne this week pledged to stop all private fundraisers and to pass election financing laws before the House rises for the summer break. Why the sudden hurry? Well, it likely has something to do with the reporting by Martin Redcon, Queen's Park columnist for the Toronto Star. And it's a pleasure to welcome him back to Focus Ontario. Thanks so much for being here. What did you discover about what Liberal ministers are doing?
Well, first of all, I discovered that no one was paying attention to what Liberal ministers were doing. And so I started to hear about how they were all working behind the scenes, overtime, moonlighting, to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars each as a target, as an annual target, mostly from companies and unions because of this endless appetite that the Liberal Party had, and the other parties in their own way, for fundraising to raise millions of dollars a year. And we'd had a taste of this before, especially the way these cabinet ministers would meet stakeholders in these private fundraisers. So the people that they were in charge of regulating by day, they would be hitting up for money by night. But they tended to be one-day wonders. So the Star had a story about this with Robert Benzie writing about in 2013, where Bob Chiarelli and the Premier met people from the nuclear industry and raised $100,000 in this Yorkville soiree. And then it happened again a month or so ago. So it never seemed to change things. But when people hear about these secret targets, I think that got the public's attention finally.
And specifically the secret targets by meeting with those who are under your file. That's your file.
Yeah, not exclusively, but that was where they raised, that's where the big money is, and the reliable money, and these kind of shakedowns with these stakeholders.
But it's paying for access to the minister.
Correct. We don't have smoking guns of ministers actually doing quid pro quos, but the exchange that does take place, that's undeniable, is access and priority of access.
So let's then move to the wider question, because when the Liberals said, okay, well, listen, we're not going to do this anymore, they immediately turned their guns on Patrick Brown and said, you need to cancel your upcoming fundraiser.
Yeah, they tried to get out ahead of the story after being about 10 years behind the day. I mean, this is a bit like the beer store, by the way. How do these things happen where unions and companies are having secret meetings with cabinet ministers? And the answer is no one was paying attention. Same so Ontario was frozen in time. So now they're trying to get out ahead. Suddenly they have found God. They have found religion on this issue and trying to turn the tables on the opposition. Now, the opposition does not have clean hands on this either. There was this kind of conspiracy of silence in the legislature where they almost never raised it, certainly didn't make it a priority, none of the opposition parties. And so the Liberals are having some fun with this, but they're mixing it up. You know, they're trying to confuse and conflate these stakeholder fundraisers with general fundraisers. I'm not against political parties trying to raise money any more than churches or other groups. The thing is, when you have it face to face with the people you're trying to regulate by day, instead of having an arm's length relationship, you're arm in arm with the people you're in charge of. Well, so they've tried to mix it up and put the opposition on the spot in a slightly deceptive way.
But Mr. Brown's saying is, well, listen, I can't give out 10 cents. But yet that belies the fact that he's trying to become premier.
Absolutely. Again, he's being disingenuous there. Everyone's playing games here. The idea that it's true that he can't give out millions and billions of dollars in contracts, but no one has yet proven a direct link that the government has done that either. These interest groups, these stakeholders, these companies, these corporate interests, and especially land developers are trying to make sure that they can get their calls returned so that they can make their case on a priority basis with ministers and the premier. Equally, they are trying to hedge their bets with the man who could be premier in about 2.5 years. And so these fundraising donations are really for future considerations and future access.
How far behind is Ontario in terms of election financing laws?
We're way behind the times. So the federal parliament started to move on this at the beginning of this century, if I can put it that way. Jean Chrétien started to reduce corporate and union donations dramatically. And then Stephen Harper, the conservative Prime Minister of Canada, finished it off in 2006. So it has been a decade that Ontario has done nothing while the federal parliament led the way. And 4 other provinces have come around on banning union and corporate donations so far. And it's not as if I have to explain to you or our listeners why corporate and union donations are a bad thing. So here we are, 10 years later, finally we're moving on this.
The Tories have long complained about third-party advertising, and the Liberals say, now we're going to address that right away, even before the break for the summer. What are you hearing about what that will be like, and will it outlaw those sort of third-party union-funded advertising that we saw in the last election?
In fairness to the government, this one they did announce last summer. So they did say we would do something on third-party fundraising, and it sometimes tried to confuse us and say, well, we're moving on fundraising in general. No. Fundraising for third parties is so egregious and so outrageous in Ontario, where millions of dollars are spent by primarily unions, in this case the Working Families Coalition, that has teamed up and piled on against the Tories. The Tories kind of opened the door to that by being so anti-union. So it's completely unregulated in Ontario, other than disclosure. That's how we know the amounts of money. Federally, there is a limit. I believe it's about 150 or so, in that order of magnitude, $1,000. And I think that Ontario has to and has declared it's going to move on that soon.
All right, something to look forward to over the spring and summer. Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Alan.
Just ahead.